when an arc flash happens, there are 60 explosions per second. So most breakers are made to trip in a half a cycle, right? That's only 1/120th of a second. Some of the instantaneous trips might be 1/40th of a second. So that's why a lot of times when an electrician or maintenance guy cuts a hot wire and it explodes and it's loud, there's not a giant arc flash because that breaker does what it's supposed to do.
Okay, welcome to the Electrical Safety Podcast. I'm your host, John Travis, and today I'll be speaking with Jason Brozen. Jason is an arc flash survivor who also has now made his life's journey to keep other people safe from the dangers of arc flash and electrical safety. He's a public speaker and also provides electrical safety training. Today, we'll try to learn as much as we can from Jason, his incident, and what we can do to help our organizations avoid the same type of thing. Jason, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, no, it's my pleasure. I guess just to get started, if you could kind of give us a rundown maybe on how you got into the trade itself and then leading up to, how you ended up doing what you do today.
Great. Thank you. So it started, in my 20s. I was went back into college and I was looking for something to do, for some direction, and trades were where I was at. There was a lot of construction going back. I started with an engineering program, and then I realized very quickly that since I didn't pay attention in math class as much as I should have, there was no way I was going to be able to do the amount of math. So I got steered into a electrical technology program, which is basically for electricians, and it was a pioneer program there at that school. And I went through that and found out I was actually decent at it. So I started in the residential trade and spent about a year there, which was long enough to understand what I needed to know. Then I moved into a commercial type electrical situation and did a lot of different aspects of that, including some project management. But then I spent 20 years in the electrical service industry. So I worked on residential, commercial, industrial, audio, video, communication. And then, when I reached a point in my 40s, I thought, okay, I've had enough. And I've worked in virtually every aspect, including production management, project management, HR, as an electrician, et cetera. And so I thought I needed to get out of the field and stop twisting wire nuts, and I wanted to do something different. So I looked into virtual design construction, or the building information modeling, the CAD work, right? Pre-construction. So I spent a couple of years in that, and then COVID hit, and the project that I was running at the time was a $100 million office project, and they just quit it because we didn't need office, space during COVID year, which was great because I realized after a couple of years of that industry that that's not what I wanted to spend my life doing. So I went back to doing some larger project management, jobs, and that's where electrical power and safety company saw something I'd done in the past, EPSCO, company I used to work for. And the owner there is very passionate about safety and approached me about doing a safety video type thing. So some of your viewers may have seen that 15 or 45-minute video that EPSCO created for me and now. And they offered that to everybody for free, right? In the interest of keeping people safe. And so that blew up. I was absolutely startled and humbled and just blown away about how many people that actually reached, right, across the globe. And so at that point, something snapped. And I thought, you know what? I need to be in the safety industry full time. So I spent a couple of years. I actually jumped ship and went to work for EPSCO for a couple of years as a NFPA 70E trainer. Right. So I'm a CESCP. That's an NFPA certification, certified electrical safety compliance professional. And so I've been professionally training, engineers, electricians, and maintenance teams in the 70E, which is required every 3 years. And then great opportunity. I could have stayed there. Great culture, great company. I just needed to reach a few more people, right? I just felt like I was missing some opportunities. And so that's why I started with Tyndale, who is a PPE provider, right? Largely. and very strong vision, mission, passion to save lives. Workers' lives are very important. And so that's kind of a nutshell where I'm at today and how I got there.
Yeah. Yeah. And so then I guess people are probably curious, that video you mentioned that EPSCO helped create. Could you walk us through what that video is about and maybe the backstory there a little bit?
Sure, sure. And maybe I don't know if it's possible that you link stuff that maybe you throw a link in,
Yeah,
but
we can.
yeah. So basically what happened, the reason the video was created is in 2009, April 7th, 2009, I was tasked to install a 200 amp breaker in a piece of 2,500 amp electrical equipment, a main distribution panel at a hotel.
Mhm.
It's a 120/208 service. And that's another thing, is that being 120/208, a lot of electricians, maintenance teams, they will cavalierly open a 120/208 panel to do work inside of it because they say to themselves, it's only 120/208
Right.
and it's not a hazard. Whereas they won't get into a 277/480 volt panel because they're like, that thing's going to blow up on me. So just briefly, I'll show you that. These are the stickers that EPSCO uses. Most of the panels you have to put stickers on your panels every 5 years. It's required.
Yeah.
Most of your your 277/480 panels are going to be an NA. Means that you don't even need arc flash PPE, right? A lot of those. Whereas almost all of your 120/208 panels look like that. You have to have a shirt, pants, coveralls, face shield, hard hat, headsock, all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of PPE that's required for a lot of different situations. But so anyway, backing up. So it's a 120/208 service. So of course, being a complacent, long-time master electrician, very common. I've done this a million times. We've always done it this way. I don't need PPE. I'm just going to fill in the blank. Don't tell me my job. I've been doing this for 20 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those are what we say. So I'm in this piece of equipment. I need to put this breaker in. And it's a piece of GE equipment. And it came from the factory with a space for a breaker. And when they do that, there's tape on the 3 bus bars that the breaker has to attach to. And I need to get that tape cut off the bus bars. So in my complacency, of course, I think, okay, I can do this. I've done stupid things like this before and survived. So I've built that complacency in. And I lean in there real close with my utility knife and I start cutting the tape off those bus bars. About halfway through that is, like you see the surgeon with the nurse patting their head and sweating, it was a precarious situation. And that's when I called my boss and said, hey, maybe we should turn this off, right? It's really sketchy. Now, complacency isn't limited to electricians. It's also with business owners. If you're a company or a business that has not had any accidents, you're going to just keep on keeping on, even if your safety rules are lax, right? So after a conversation with my boss, the consensus was, okay, we'll just be careful. Now, he didn't just tell me to be careful because he didn't care, because he did. He was like a father to me. I mean, I worked for him for a long time. Yeah. He also cared about the bottom line more than his employees. But it was that complacency. He had his best electrician on the job site. He'd never had an accident like that in the 30 years of his job or of his company's history. Mm-hmm. So it was easy for him to be complacent as well. So that was enough motivation for me to go back to doing what I was doing, which I got through. I got through that. And I often talk about dominoes. In life, you got a row of dominoes. So every time you make a bad decision, you flip a domino. And by the time I got to the second to the last of my dominoes, which was cutting off the tape off of an energized bus bar, a large piece of equipment, you're making really bad decisions by the time you get to that domino, right? One of the problems is you flip those dominoes, and as you do it, it's easy, right? Of course, putting on your PPE is hot, it's inefficient, it takes you longer, and most of the time you get through it, 99.9% of the time. But every time you do that, you flip one of those dominoes, right? As human beings, we don't keep jumping off 25-foot cliffs, right? Then we go to a 50, a 75, a 100, a 125, and then we die, right? So you're going to keep pushing the envelope just like a rat that gets the cheese in the maze and finds a shortcut. you've now trained your brain because you didn't put that PPE on and you survived. Hey, I mean, nothing went wrong last time. And so that's how that complacency is built. So I got through that process, and now I needed to put that big breaker in. It was about this big, to slide that into that spot. Well, the bus bars look like this inside of there, ABC. One of the bus bars was really tight to A-phase like that. And the breakers has to fit in between those bars like that. It would not fit because it was too tight. I needed to tweak that bar down so that it was even so that breaker could fit in there. Well, you can't just stick a screwdriver in there, right? That'd be stupid. Those are energized bars.
Yep.
I was thinking, how can I do this without blowing myself up? And I thought, well, maybe I could use my heavy wooden carpenter's pencil. And I was like, nah, that's got graphite in it, right? That's not a good idea. And so I go, oh, I know what I can use. I've got some fiber fuse pullers. Those yellow fuse pullers, they're made to go into a restricted approach boundary and pull energized fuses. They're plastic or fiberglass. Those work. They have a narrow end. I can stick that in there and kind of twist it to tweak that bar down so that breaker will fit in there. Not even for one brief second that I realized there was a metal rivet that holds the sandwiches of that tool together. So I slid that tool into that gap as soon as I got to the rivet. Right? Huge arc flash happened. Probably lasted at the very most an eighth of a second. You are not going to get away from an arc flash. It is so fast. And we're talking about cycles, 60 hertz, 60 cycles. Most of your listeners have heard that before. That is a sine wave that goes up and down, back to zero, 60 times every second. When an arc flash happens, there are 60 explosions per second. Really, it explodes and then it kind of retracts, explodes, retracts. So most breakers are made to trip in a half a cycle, right? That's only 1/120th of a second. So that's fast, right? Some of the instantaneous trips might be 1/40th of a second. So that's why a lot of times when an electrician or maintenance guy cuts a hot wire and it explodes and it's loud, there's not a giant arc flash because that breaker does what it's supposed to do. In my case, there were three 2,500 amp fuses that have a certain amount of time that it takes to trip those. And then a lot of conductors outside to a transformer that was just feet away, which increases that energy level quite a bit. In my case, that calculated energy level was somewhere between 65 and 82 calories, which in 2009, a 40 cal suit was the biggest they made. They told you couldn't survive bigger than a 40 cal, and anything above that would have been a unicorn. So there was a lot of miracles that kept me alive. One of which was the transformer A-phase fuse, the primary fuse on the transformer outside, blew, which killed that arc between A and B and C, but it stopped that arc. Had that arc continued, I probably would have reached that 85 or 82 calorie limit, and it would have killed me. Right? My cloak did ignite on my upper half, on my left chest. I still had my coat. But the first thing I thought of after the explosion, which was in slow-mo, right? I could feel the pulses of those cycles. As soon as the accident was over, I thought to myself, oh my God, I'm on fire, right? Because I'd seen lots of videos. One of the guys I followed for decades was Scott Margolin. He's now my boss at Tyndale, kind of a guru of arc flash, right? He does these arc flash tests at Kima Laboratories and Connectrix up in Canada. And amazing. I've used these videos for my personal and training use for forever, right? Yep. And so I knew what happened with arc flash. I'd seen the burning mannequins and in the clothing. So I immediately patted out my clothing, and then I saw a light where a manager had opened the door to the electrical room, and I couldn't see much, but I found my way out of the room, and then that began the process of recovery.
Yeah, you mentioned that you're going to try to adjust this thing without blowing yourself up. So did you know, did you know that was a possibility?
That's a fantastic question. So again, that kind of goes back to the 12208 electricians are like, no big deal. And then the 277 480, oh, that's a huge deal.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I knew there was a hazard because, like I said, I'd seen those videos, but I'd built so much complacency, and I was like, 120, yeah, it's not as volatile. Well,
Hmm.
I knew there was an arc flash hazard, but I didn't understand at that point in my life incident energy levels and the whole calculations behind all that. Available fault currents, those kind of things. I talk largely about the most important things for somebody in my position. Let me back up and answer one more question you had. I should have turned that off. Every electrician should have turned that off. Per this book right here, which is what I live in, the NFPA 70
Hmm.
for electrical safety in the workplace. That's not an okay task to do without shutting it off. I hear a lot of electricians say, well, we're maintenance teams. We can't shut that off because we may run this IT room and we'll shut the whole place down. Right? That's not a good enough excuse. We're talking about life safety. You can't shut off a hospital transfer switch because you'll kill the generator in the utility and will kill the people in ICU. Right? That's what we're talking about. Are you killing a panel that kills ventilation fans that allows hazardous fumes to build up, either explosive or toxic to humans? Right? That's what we're talking about. Right? We're not talking about we can't shut it off because it might inconvenience somebody. Right? So I should have shut that gear off. Had I shut that off, I wouldn't be on your podcast today.
Right.
Right? That's the reality. Even the three most important things: PPE. Right? That's the reason I work for Tyndale's, because it's the most important thing. Right? I
Yep.
mean, PPE is your last line of defense. But if you're a knucklehead like I was, and I'd been wearing PPE at least minimally, I probably would have not be. I'd probably not be on this podcast.
Mm-mm.
Right?
I actually
Yeah, I
made a
would.
post. I had a post the other day that, because I hear that all the time, PP is your last line of defense. But when you think through every single electrical job that anyone ever has to do, um, you need PPE for pretty much all of them.
You
Even
do.
if de-energizing it, you still need the PPE
Love that.
to prove that so I don't buy that it's your last line of defense. I always say it's your first. And then I understand the hierarchy of controls, and
Yeah.
pe-
Mhm.
people got, they commented on LinkedIn there when I made that post. But that was my point, is that oftentimes you're in a situation where the hierarchy of controls, so that's, engineering and
Elimination.
procedures and all that stuff, they're not really options right then and there. The only one you've got is PPE. So anyway,
Yeah, they put them on the cover so you could see them on
yeah,
the list. But those are your things. The PPE is your last line of defense. But I also tell people PPE is not designed to keep you safe, right? It's designed to keep you alive. You could still be in a panel if you are exceeding or actually meeting, if you're in an 11.9 calorie shirt, you're in a 12 calorie panel, or 12 calorie shirt, 11.9 calorie panel. There is still a chance that you could go to the hospital with a second degree burn, right? And the arc flash boundary is at a second degree burn if you don't have any PPE on. But to your point, one of the biggest things that I spend debunking with maintenance teams, with electricians, is they say, well, we don't work anything hot. I'm like, well, we lock it out. And I'll say, well, that's great. I mean, that's step 6 of the electrically safe work condition. But
mm,
step 7, you've got a live, dead, live, tested dead, right? And so de-energizing, just like you said, de-energizing is energized work.
right.
Re-energizing is energized work. There's just a little piece in the middle where you're doing your task that's actually de-energized, where you don't need PPE, where you don't need boundaries. Every time else, every other situation, you
Yeah, I
do.
mean, if you just take a quick run through list of the incidents that have happened over the last 10 years, I'm sure a number of them are people working on equipment that they thought that they had de-energized, and they didn't.
Absolutely.
And that's why you still have to have that test in there. And that's
Mhm.
why you still treat it as if it's live. Now, what I was thinking and where I was going with that question earlier is, And so you mentioned complacency, and then you also mentioned your boss and the conversation you had with him. And so just for clarification, um, the boss was the owner of the facility or the manager of the facility, and you were a maintenance worker of that facility, or you were a contractor brought in, or how what was the relationship there?
Yeah.
Contractor.
So the owner was my boss. I was pretty much the next in line. At that point, I was a production manager, and so I would be tasked with some of the more risky, things
Okay.
that required a little more thought out processes, just because of my experience level.
And the
So
boss
yeah,
wasn't like an electrically did he know anything about electrical or did
yeah, master electrician, owned the company for 30 years, accountant, great guy, and also very, very smart, right?
Oh,
Intelligent.
sorry. Okay, so you're working for an electrical contractor company.
I'm working for my boss in a
I see.
hotel hired us to
Right,
install
okay,
some for a pool.
okay. Okay, so because this is something I see a lot, and this is one of the I would say, from my experience, one of the biggest gaps in the entire industry is contractors. When you have a facility, let's say it's a, I don't know, food production plant, and they have 5 electrical workers there. A lot of times what I find is that those 5 electrical workers have been the squeaky wheel enough that the management team recognizes, "Oh, yeah, you guys do have some hazards we need to deal with." And they start, they do an arc flash study, or they get the PPE and the training and things like that. The gap I see is a hotel owner or whatever, um, a major, companies like maybe Walmarts and big grocery store chains and things like that, that they don't have electrical workers that work there every day. They contract it all out. So to them, they don't see they don't see the hazard at all. They rely on you 100% that you know that you understand the hazard and you know what you're doing. Okay, so then back to the conversation with your boss, and you mentioned complacency. And so I asked, did you actually know? And maybe the answer was that, yeah, you sort of knew, but you didn't believe that you were at any great risk. Is that true?
That is true,
Okay.
and I didn't believe that because of my experience.
Right.
Right? It's every time you survive, you just go, "Eh, I'm good." And also, to be clear, I had not a speck of PPE on. No
Mm,
earplugs, no eye protection, no gloves. Uh, all of my all of my apparel was mechanics wear, polyester nylon, cotton blend shirt, all of it flammable, meltable, you know, uh, heat it up. In Tyndale, we say, don't wear fuel, right? Don't wear fuel. And
yep.
that's what I was wearing was fuel. I was dressed head to toe in fuel and didn't have anything on to protect myself in any way, shape.
Okay. Do you believe that if it was a 480 volt, 600 volt, you would have thought differently?
I would not have got in there. And I can tell you, I've been training for a long time and I did not have that epiphany until last week. I got to thinking we're doing some green screen stuff, for the company. And I thought to myself, you know what? Had that been 277 480, there's no way I would have got in there.
Hmm.
There's no way. In my mind, I was that electrician. I was said, oh man, this is way too volatile. It's going to blow up.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And it's interesting that I didn't think about that until literally last week, 14 years later.
Yeah. Wow. So the next thing I got then, so now you've got it, you're doing training, you're I'm guessing that you're having conversations with electrical workers, maybe right across the country. Um, what's your feeling on, if you had to pick a percentage of those electrical workers, how many of them would go into a 480 volt panel and still assume the same thing that you did going into the lower voltage? Like, what's your feeling on that? Do you think people are starting to understand the message more, or is it still Do we still have quite a ways to go?
I think we got quite a ways to go based on what I've seen. For the last 2 years with EPSCO, largely it was maintenance teams, large and small. I mean, I could train
Mhm.
two guys. There might be 100 people, right? So it's big or small. I covered it, right? So very consistently in there, I would hear, well, there's two things that I came to realize. Number one, orc flash is highly underreported, right?
Mm.
Highly underreported. They say there's, you know, I don't know. I mean, it's 10 to 15 a month or something or whatever, but it's just a very unreported because every class that I would do, I would ask, hey, does anybody in here know anybody or have been orc flash? And every time there'd be at least one or
Yep.
two raise their hand. Uh, but also that they didn't have the appropriate PPE or the training, the risk assessment, the PPE, and the general training, right? They were missing that. I was there to help them with the training. But a lot of times it was kind of a mob mentality at the end going, hey, we don't have all the stuff to keep ourselves safe in there. I didn't even know.
Mhm.
Right. So there's a lot of people out there that don't know. Now that's more pervasive in the maintenance side of things and large production like food, pharmaceutical, automotive, that kind of stuff. Now, when you're talking about larger like contractors like IBEW contractors, they're very good at promoting safety. And they are very good at having, an electrical safety program that requires, uh, PPE. I'm a firm believer in daily wear PPE, by the way. I don't know if that matters, but there's a lot of contractors that carry a bag around with PPE. It's task
Yeah.
based,
Yeah.
right? And you leave that bag of task based PPE in your truck or in somebody else's truck or at the office. It's going to be 5 o'clock on a Friday, and you're going to be in front of that panel, and you're going to go, "Dang it! It's only going to take me a second, right? I'm not driving to the shop." So if you can get your people into daily wear PPE, it's much safer. But anyway, the PPE thing, the aspect is huge. The training is starting to get traction, right? Because companies are
Mhm.
wanting to check the box, whether they have a crappy safety program or a fantastic one. They know they need the training. So training traction, but the risk assessment, they're just starting to kind of try to understand that, and the PPE is really needs to gain a lot more traction. That's
Mm.
another reason for the move to Tyndale. It's a big deal.
Yeah, well, I know why, where I started in the mining world, and that was something that we introduced very early on. I think everybody, they got 3 pairs of clothes or 5 pairs of clothes, and we just made it so that it was the electrical group anyway had that's what they wore all the time, arc flash
Mhm.
rated clothing. Because you're right, that I don't know if you heard of the concept of non-enabled and enabled, but basically, you could look at an incident and you can say, well, did we enable that guy? Like, did he have everything right at his fingertips so then he just made a bad decision. And so if it boiled down to, well, no, he would have had to go back to the shop to get that thing. That means he was non-enabled, right? So you cut him a little bit of slack. And what you're trying to do constantly is shave off those non-enabled things. You want to enable your workers as much as possible to make the right choice. And that's why going back, that's why I ask. I'm always so curious about that because, once, what, like once the hazard exists, there's PPE, you know, whether you're doing a risk assessment or not, an official one. Like the other day, um, it was a big thunder and lightning storm right outside my house, and there was something in the van I wanted to go get, and I actually had that thought. I was like, maybe I should just wait 10 minutes. If it was like lightning, thunder, you know, really close
Right.
together, it was close to the house. I did a risk assessment. That's what I did, and people don't realize they do that. Same when you put your seatbelt on every day, you're doing risk assessment, and so I do think that the safety world and the training world and that they make it almost so complicated that people don't understand what they're doing.
It's
Right. And
true.
if so then I'm always wondering, okay, like once a worker understands, "All right, I'm about to go into this panel. I know I can get a shot. I know if I do something wrong, an arc flash can happen. Then they call their boss. They talk about it. They say, yeah, that's kind of crazy. And then they still do it. That's what I'm always I'm always so curious. It's like, and yeah, so it's just like, I don't know. I guess just, how, when you reflect on that, and I asking about your boss a little bit too. Like, have you guys ever talked about that afterwards? Like, what was
So
going?
for me, like just reflecting, like just me personally, the reason I would do something like that is because, people have different characteristics, right? I'm a helper, right? I'm not too good to pick up a broom and help somebody sweep, right? I'd get in a ditch and help dig or help pull wire with my guys as a project manager. So I'm wired to be a helper, right? Hand and tools. So I want to get this job done, right? That's what's driving me is, hey, I want to get
Right.
this done. Like the hotel, my boss. But for other people, a major factor would be, I'm a new guy. I'm not stupid. I'm ignorant, right? But I want to please my boss or my immediate supervisor, right? So I'm going to do that. And I'm not going to ask questions because I don't want them to think I'm stupid and I don't want to bother them. And I want to get it done and be a shining star, right? So that's a huge factor too. Then you've got the factor that's 5 o'clock on a Friday, or you're on an emergency call and you haven't slept. Those kind of things where you've got pressure. You got a customer screaming at you, hey, we got to get our power back on. You got to get this done. I don't care what it takes. We got to get it done, So you've got pressure, right? So you either have pressure, you either have your personal pressure to please, or like me, you just want to help and get the job done, right?
Yeah.
And largely, what's interesting, throughout another thing is that it tuned that we do ARC Week every year, like Shark Week. This year's 3 arc flash survivors. It's exactly those 3 things. You got me, the helper. You got another guy who was 42% arc flash burnt, Brandon Smith, and then Brandon Trader, who was just trying to get the job done late on a Friday, right? So you have those 3 exact things. In all 3 of us, common thing, no PPE.
Yep.
Right. Whether we knew better, we didn't know better, none of us were wearing that PPE.
Yeah.
So those are the factors that really affect the decisions.
Yeah, you mentioned the dominoes earlier, and I like the Swiss cheese slice analogy.
Mm-hmm.
See, now I'm sure you heard that one before. You get however many numbers layered, and if all the holes line up properly, because yeah, when there is an incident, it's never just one thing. And most likely in every arc flash incident story you're going to hear about, the person wasn't wearing PPE. And I'm always so curious as what are the other pieces of cheese that led up to that thing happening and they weren't wearing PPE. Because you're right, you talk about they go unreported. And yeah, probably the only times they report it is when they have no choice but to report it. Right. And so how many arc flash events did we not even know about? Okay, so now that you're kind of into that, spreading the word, sending the message, training others. And I know you mentioned PPE already, touched on risk assessment. What are those things that you really want to make sure that you pass along to others so that, so they can avoid something like this?
So the 3 things that I try to train in, and as a trainer, I was already doing the training, right? The 70 and that kind of training. And also talking about risk assessment. That risk assessment, like you said, it's not rocket science. If you stop at a stop sign and you look both ways, that's a risk assessment, right? You're looking for the hazard, which is a source of possible injury or damage to health. And then you're addressing the risk, which is how much are you going to get injured, right? Are you going to be injured? How much? And that kind of stuff. So there's different levels of hazard and risk in every situation. Obviously, if you walk down with a metal umbrella in the lightning storms, you've now increased your risk of getting struck by lightning, supposedly, right? I don't know about non-scientists, but I would think that would increase the risk, right?
Yeah, I believe it.
Right, I wouldn't risk it, right? So Yeah, the PPE is paramount, and in the training, in the risk assessment, really the training is kind of where I've dedicated my life in the last several years. And I try to make it, my training was 4 hours,
Hmm.
right? That was it. It's 4 hours. There's some trainers that do an amazing job that it takes 8 hours.
Yep.
And there's some trainers that do an amazing job that takes 16 hours, right? I chose to make a 4 hour program. Now I'm talking like, if you're an old school guy, you remember the guy Johnny Machino, he used to talk super fast, like in the Fenix commercials and
Oh
all that.
yeah.
I'm trying to get a lot of information out in 4 hours, right? You can't even cover everything in this book in 4 hours. It's just impossible. But I try to make it simple, right? Like boundaries, restricted approach, limited approach, hard flash boundary. I really just break that down into really simple, easy to understand bites of information.
Hmm.
And one of the most important things that people in a maintenance team can understand are boundaries, right? Because a lot of it, any training you want to put your finger on. If somebody says, "I'm going to put you through a 16-hour crash course on piano playing," right? You've never played piano. 2 weeks later, they come back and they say, "Hey, we want you to play that song you learned in the piano lesson." You're not going to be able to play it, right? Only get it with practice and day-to-day use and getting in this book and understanding it, right? So I don't care if the training is 30 minutes or 2 days, you have to focus on some things that are memorable. What are the few things they're going to remember? Because they're not going to remember everything you said.
Yeah.
So for me, I want them to remember to not be me. Don't blow yourself up, man. They see my story and my images of me in the hospital, my recovery time, 1 week in a coma, 2 weeks in ICU, 5 months of intense hand therapy, 7 months off work. I want them to remember that. I want them to remember some boundaries and risk assessment procedures, right? Or at least to think to themselves, I think there's something I need to do here.
Mm.
Let me go talk to my boss who's going to make me fill out an energized electric work permit, which includes risk assessment and PPE. Or I need to look in this book at some of the charts, right, on my distances or whatever, right? So that's the main thing I try to get across. It's just a few simple points. Maybe, I'm not narcissistic that I want people just to remember me, but I want people to remember my accident, right? So they go, "Oh my God, I saw this one guy,"
Yeah.
right?
Well, I think
Don't be,
that's that. That kind of hits the nail on the head, and it was probably what I was getting at with some of the questions earlier on. It's because you could memorize the tables and boundaries and numbers and all that stuff, but is that actually going to stop you in the moment that you're about to make a decision that is the wrong decision? Or, and I would say it is stories and personal stories. And if you have one yourself that can resonate with people, that's going to help save a lot more people, I think, than statistics and
Mhm.
and tables and stuff like that. So no, I think that's a great place to kind of close the conversation. I did want to ask you one more. You mentioned Arc Week. Is there anything else, kind of coming up soon that maybe you'd want people to hear about, or maybe just, you know, where would be a good place to reach out to you? Anything at all that you just kind of wanted to let us know about?
Yeah, two ways, real important, and I am highly available, right? Via text, via email for questions because I'm literally very interested in saving lives, right? It's very important. Um, Tyndale does Art Week every year. I would encourage anybody to look up, TyndaleUSA.com. Very shortly, we're going to be releasing the Arc Week footage, the episodes. There's several episodes, 5 or 6. I can't remember what we've figured out, but there's 3 Arc Flash episodes with Brandon Schrader, Brandon Smith, and Jason Brozen, myself. Uh, and then there's the Shark Dive episode, which is a lot of fun. and it has some really good information. And then we're going to have kind of another episode of us kind of roundtabling with William Watson with Miller Electric, who's an amazing safety professional as well. And Scott Margolin's in there. And it's just an amazing think tank of safety, right?
Mm.
So check out the website, tyndallusa.com. In the blog section, I believe it's in there. And you could, my story, though, you can just watch my thing on there too, or you can link my YouTube, or you can look me up on LinkedIn. Like all my contacts wide open on there at post safety stuff. One thing that has given me a leg up on a lot of people is that I have been a master electrician for 28 years and in construction for 35. And I'm a CESCP, so that gets me into the ivory tower with some of the EHF professionals. And I also got blown up, right? So it's a different, it allows me to talk to a lot of different people, which is
Mhm.
a great, it's a blessing totally.
Oh, that's incredible. So, thank you again, Jason, for coming on, and we'll be sure I'll hit you up after, make sure I get all the links right. We'll link to everything in the show notes. And yeah, thanks for coming on. It's a pleasure.
Awesome. Appreciate you having me.